baseball hat, which
Oh, I just didn't see you on my screen because there's a few people. But hi, how are you?
I'm okay, and you?
Good, I'm good. It's nice to see you're out here supporting Judy.
Well, I see Judy
Yeah,
every Sunday.
yeah,
Judy is a great friend of mine. We agree on
yes.
lots of things.
I'm very grateful to you because I seem to be among all opposition thinking people differently. But it's okay. It's okay. I think that's good that we don't all
Absolutely.
think alike. There are some different opinions, and I have different opinions on many issues because I am more left to center of politics, and everybody is on the right of
Right.
center politics today. That's what happens.
Yeah. Uh, we won't talk about this country, United States, which, thank goodness, we are where we are.
Yeah, right there. And where we're going, the future doesn't look so hot either.
That's why, among other things, your talk is so important.
Yeah, well, on the Q&A, I don't talk too much about politics. Some of it in mine. I can't avoid politics. I, I am a very politicized person. This is not the regular presentation I usually make. The, because I have a much longer one and I talk about the gender issue, the women in the Holocaust. But this is different because it's about my memoir,
Hmm.
so it's a different platform. And you'll hear what I say. So
It's
when do we start? I don't know.
it's after 4, so I'm going to go ahead and get started. All right?
So
But I don't know how you start. The
I'm
starting comes at your end.
okay. I'm going to introduce you, and here it goes.
Okay.
All right. Welcome, everybody, to the third day of Bethel Synagogue's book festival. Our special guest today is Judy Cohen, who comes to us from Canada. She's speaking to us actually from Canada. She was born in Hungary, in Debrecen, Hungary, in 1928. And this is enough to let us know that she was in the in the Holocaust. Most of her family was murdered in the Holocaust, um, and she was liberated by the U.S. Army and placed in a displaced persons camp. In 1948, she made her way to Montreal, where she married and raised a family. They moved to Toronto, and I have another question about the Canada. Um, this website, she established her own website, Women and the Holocaust, Women of the Holocaust. And there is a place, if you go to her website, which will remind you at the end of the talk, you can donate to her legacy fund. This legacy fund sponsors the March of the Living in Canada. And it's also sponsored by the Azrieli Foundation of Canada, which we will hear further of about. You have to understand this is an American audience, which is not going to be very familiar with the Azrieli Foundation, so we need to learn. And it says in the website, in one of the articles about Judy, how an educated, cultured, sophisticated, democratic society, which Germany was in the 1910s and the 1920s, could become agreeable with starvation, torture, and extermination. Our country dances or danced very close to this. How could an educated, cultured, sophisticated, democratic society deal with fascism? How could it lean to fascism so that a large proportion of its population was sent away to die? And you can speak about this, Judy. I will turn it over to you, and
Uh,
I'm sure that there'll be many, many questions.
Very good. I must call my son to help me here because my text is on the screen. I can't put it on with the Zoom. You must wait 1 second.
Sure.
My son is in next door.
No problem.
Jane, I could speak about the ASRI Foundation while Judy.
Yes,
uh,
you can
okay,
speak about
so-
the Azrieli Foundation.
All right, so the Azrieli Foundation is a Canadian philanthropic organization that has a number of initiatives. One of them is the Holocaust Survivor Memoirs Program, which is the program that I work with. And what we do is we collect and we publish the stories of Holocaust survivors who lived through the Holocaust and came to Canada after the war. So they're Holocaust stories.
First
They're
thing is
also
turn off the
Canadian
camera
stories.
so that they can't see me.
And maybe if you
So
can mute
where
Judy,
is your,
there's some conversation
yeah,
going
where
on.
is
Can
your
you
text?
mute
Yeah,
Judy for
I
now?
just had it on.
Oops.
Perfect. Anyway, so we have published to date, including we've got Piches Guter on board here. We've also published his memoir. We've published 120 stories to date, and they're varied stories from all different countries, all different experiences. And what we do once the books are published is that we distribute them for free to schools and libraries across Canada to help teachers, encourage students and teach the students about the Holocaust. We develop educational resources that complement the stories. So it gives the teachers the opportunity to not only have the children or the students read their stories, but also to have a turnkey type of resource that they can use and help the students understand not only the horrors of the Holocaust, but also what can happen in, if you don't vote, if you don't choose the right people to be into government, and what the difference between upstanders and bystanders, and just critical thinking, historical thinking, to just really think about the effects of what happens when hatred can turn to such to atrocities such as the Holocaust. So it's an amazing program. We encourage you to go onto our website. You can certainly order books if you would like to. They are available for sale on Amazon. They're available at the bookstores. And if you want, you can contact me. I can send you a PDF of the books, if anyone is interested in.
Hello, I'm back.
Okay, great. Good timing. And so just,
Okay.
enjoy the program. Judy is a phenomenal speaker, and I think you'll find her story quite fascinating. So thank you.
Thanks, Ellen.
I am back. Okay. Well, first of all, I want to thank the
But
congregation.
we don't see you. We don't.
I can't do it. I don't know what to do. Jonathan! Jonathan! I never thought of that because I have to have my script. They can't see me.
Hi, Jonathan. We want to see your mother.
Oh, can you
There
see
we go.
me now?
There
Okay.
you are.
Okay, here I am. First of all, I would like to thank the congregation for choosing my book to hear about. And thank you, Jane, for all the correspondence we had in between, which was by itself very nice. Well,
Okay.
let me start, okay? Here is my text that I am Judy Cohen, author of the memoir, A Cry in Unison, Sistering the Holocaust, published by the Azrieli Foundation on May 5, 2019, during the pandemic. I am originally from Debrecen, Hungary. I come from a large family of 3 sisters and 3 brothers. Although I dearly loved everyone in my family, I believe my mother and sister's strength and resiliences were the early influencers that helped shape the woman I have become. I am one of the few fortunate ones who managed to survive, while millions did not. I am witness to the genocide of my people, having survived Auschwitz-Birkenau Nazi death camp, the Bergen-Belsen deadly concentration camp, a slave labor camp, and a forced march, then turned into a death march. My survival was possible for being fortunate enough to be together with my 3 older sisters, Elizabeth, Clara, and Eva, in the Nazi inferno at least part of the time of my incarceration. Then, in stages, we were separated and I remained alone at the age of 16, very sick with high fever and dysentery. Only after the war ended did I learn what happened to my sisters. As fate would have it, while so very sick and alone, I met up with 2 sisters on our way when we were transported to the Bergen-Belsen camp. And these sisters I knew way back when in Debrecen. In their kindness, they took pity on me and embraced me as their camp sister. Camp sister took care of me, and we struggled through all the difficulties together till the very end. Without them and my own sisters, I would not have survived. It was very important for me, the sense of belonging, to know that somebody cared whether I wake up in the morning or not. I started talking about my Holocaust experiences on the day following my retirement in year 1993. That's when I turned 65. After decades of only silent private remembrances, my trigger point to go public was a brief but shattering yet gut-wrenching confrontation with a screaming group of young neo-Nazis and Holocaust deniers in the heart of Midtown Toronto, where I was on a stroll during my lunch hour. For a terrifying few seconds, the lines got blurred between the past and present. Auschwitz-Birkenau beckoned. I wondered, was I looking back in history or in the future? Then I got angry, and the confrontation was on. This incident made me realize that Nazism, irrational hatred of various origins, as we knew it and still is in Europe, did not die with Hitler in his bunker. To my chagrin, it was and is still alive and well, re-emerging in my adopted country. I felt compelled to do something about it and went to the Toronto Holocaust Education Center to ask what I, as an individual, can do to counter Holocaust denial. I was advised I should learn how to be a public speaker and start telling my story to counter the deniers' harmful lies by falsifying history. Indeed, I did just that 29 years ago. Sadly, along the way, I had to slow down as a public speaker. After Sydney, my beloved late husband's Alzheimer's dementia developed, and he needed all my love and attention. He became my priority that lasted 16 years. During the last, most difficult year of Sid's life, I spent many depressed hours and days alone. I needed desperately to engage in something positive, something uplifting, something useful. For me, the Holocaust conjures up very painful memories. Therefore, I hesitated to write my memoir. However, I had to face the fact that I was nearing 90 years old of age and ask the natural question, if not now, when? Hoping I still remember all the important details. As I began to write, I surprised myself how much I still remembered about our crowded household, especially about my mother's constant work, taking care of our large family, the warm summer days with endless preparation of preserves for the winter, things I haven't thought about for decades, being busy as an activist, and felt wonderfully cheerful to jot them down on paper or on my keyboard, kind of reliving them and often laughing out loud at my early childhood shenanigans. It felt comforting to be back there in that calm, peaceful, and safe place. My thought just flowed freely, going through the various stages as the childhood years passed, circumstances changing from the very pleasant to the worrisome, then to the tragic, followed by lethal phases, to the realization of immense losses, turning my laughter to bitter tears, and finally to the liberation and life's renewal by finding love and being loved, and then I could smile again. Writing my memoir was enhanced by all the research I did constantly on the wider historical aspects of the Holocaust while being a public speaker, thus gaining knowledge about issues beyond my personal experiences that I could and did use in my memoir. I also came to realize after a couple of years speaking that I no longer wanted to speak as a victim, but rather as an activist. I did not want to tell just a very sad story and causing sadness, pity, causing students to cry. I also concluded by studying the many details of Holocaust history that the unbelievable sufferings alone the Nazis unleashed on me and countless others are important to be remembered and talked about, but they are not the crucial lessons of the Holocaust. Neither are being pushed into cattle cars to endure the ominous, unmentionable atmosphere and stench, just to arrive at hell on earth, Auschwitz-Birkenau. The end came. It was important for me to encompass a wider political worldview that focuses on gender and women's survival of the Holocaust, both on active and spiritual resistance. So many hate groups have evolved since the Holocaust, and people are identifying with them. Ethnic animosities are being ignited again. The lesson of the Holocaust is not the horror per se, as I said. The relevant lesson is about the political, social, and judicial processes that evolved into the path that led to fascism, Nazism, and eventually to the gas chambers. This was an insidious, step-by-step process that legalized, very important point, legalized discrimination, exclusion, isolation of Jews, while underpinning it with continuous, unrelenting demonizing, degrading propaganda. Well, this is where comes the slogan nowadays that's so often used, that it started with words, but basically what it was, propaganda. Well, those, in my opinion, those are the lessons for today and for all times. As Holocaust survivor, I recognize that once citizens are deprived of basic human rights, it spirals into more injustices. Hateful, hurting ideologies are accepted, and civil societies acquiesce. As a human rights activist and author, my goal is to bring awareness of what is happening today, as I have experienced the harsh reality of how human beings can treat one another. I hope to influence audience to think about the issues of inhumanity I raised instead of making them sad. That is why I found it important to place a personal story like mine into historical context. Critical thinking is what young people must learn early and thus be more equipped to learn to navigate the ideologically overcrowded political world. Well, then came end of the war, the aftermath, as we call it today, the return to Hungary was both hopeful and traumatic. Even though I was lucky enough to find the youngest of my three brothers and a couple of male cousins alive, the enormity of my losses dawned on me here in the once familiar setting. In the death camps, we were preoccupied with sheer survival. During the period right after liberation, the priority was to regain our health and strength, get oriented how to become born-again human beings, and yearned to find my siblings who were older than I was and had a good chance to survive. Of course, I knew I will not see my parents ever again, and many extended family members. Back at home is where I realized the irreversible fait accompli. The confirmation of the drastic tragedy and change in my life. Those still missing, those who will never come back, empty home, uncertain, bleak future. For me personally, facing the heartbreaking task of telling my male cousins that their wives and children were murdered in the gas chambers of Auschwitz-Birkenau. Each day, at that point in history, they refused to believe, rendering me insane. I cried a lot during those early weeks back at home. The search for my three sisters ended when we received a note from one Eva that she's alive. Leslie and I decided to leave Hungary to meet her in Germany in a DP camp, in the Bergen-Belsen DP camp, not to be confused with the concentration camp Bergen-Belsen, where she was still recovering from immense ordeals. We were excited by the joyful prospect to be reunited with my sister Eva that trumped our angst of returning to Germany again. A bittersweet reunion with Eva also gave us more tragic news that my other two sisters, Clara, who was 22 years old, and Elizabeth, 27, starved to death practically in Eva's arms in Stutthof, another terrible death camp in Poland. Now we had the total tally. The three youngest siblings survived. While we were in the Bergen-Belsen DP camp for 2 years, we were kept people. All our basic needs were supplied free. Yet we realized we need skills to make a living no matter where we might end up. We allowed to immigrate and settle down. I don't know if you know, but few doors were open for us Jewish survivors, even after the war. Eva and I were lucky enough to come to Canada with 2,500 others on the Taylor Project, organized by the Canadian Jewish Congress in partnership with a number of Jewish clothing manufacturers. and we came on a 1-year contract. We had a job right away as soon as we arrived. My brother came later. I stayed in this industry for 3 years, during which I learned English and French, took a business course in bookkeeping and typing, to change into office work with much better earning possibilities than making dresses. Speaking personally, our healing began during those 2 years we spent in the Bergen-Belsen DP camp, among other survivors with similar pains, agonies, and memories, where we talk incessantly about our pre-Holocaust lives and experiences in the camps. There was always a shoulder to cry on. By the time we arrived in Canada and settled in, we embarked on the routine life of most immigrants in the Canadian workforce, and our main goal was to get adjusted, or as we say today, integrated, to our new milieu, working to make a living, learn the languages, get acculturated, and if possible, get further educated. Our enormous emotional burden and memories of having survived the torturous and lethal daily life in an unparalleled genocide had to be put on the back burners. In any case, not too many people were interested in our stories. By and large, we kept quiet. We received financial help for 1 month only for a rented room from the Canadian Jewish Congress. Eva and I received a kind help from a wonderful volunteer lady who we met at the railway station upon arrival in Montreal. Receiving kindness was the most welcome gift we could have hoped for. Post-traumatic stress syndrome was not yet applied to us, I believe, and we didn't get any psychological help or support from anyone. My activist work on the issues of gender, how women fared under Nazi tyranny, started with my son Jonathan insisting that after I retired to become computer and internet literate, the 3 W's, we called them in those days, World Wide Web. I am forever grateful to my son. Via the internet, I had access to a wealth of information on the history of the Holocaust and related issues. At this point, I was already an active Holocaust educator as a public speaker. As I mentioned earlier, telling about my personal experience to help combat Holocaust denial. In time, I wanted to expand my knowledge on the gender history beyond the personal. One day, my daughter, as you can see, I learned a lot from my children. One day, my daughter enrolled in women's studies at university. For one Mother's Day, surprised me with a new book titled Different Voices, Women in the Holocaust, the very first one that appeared by 2 scholars in the United States. This book was amazing and was a wake-up call for me, being a female survivor, recalling what happened immediately after we arrived in Auschwitz. As the cattle car pulled in and the doors were opened, 2 male prisoners whose job was getting us out of the cattle cars whispered very, very quietly to the young mothers who were holding babies in arms or holding young children's hands, and kept telling them, "Give the children to the grandmothers," urgently repeating this many times, but no time to explain why. We learned much, much later, in fact decades later, that these men walked to save the lives of the young mothers. They knew, having been in Birkenau for a long time, that the Jewish children under 14 and the grandmothers over 45, and this was policy, will be murdered right away or overnight in the gas chambers regardless who held the children. This way, if the grandmothers had the children, the young mothers' lives would be spared. Right from the start, the lethal gender issue was present. In my memoir, you'd learn much more details on this rarely mentioned topic. Jewish women had a double problem, being Jewish first and foremost and being female. I learned about the many-faceted, immense suffering and struggles of women to survive in the places I knew so intimately myself. The issue was not talked about on any of the available existing Holocaust websites or on the internet during those early years. That upset me, and decided to create my own website with the title Women and the Holocaust, a cyberspace of their own. And I dedicated it, of course, to the women. In fact, this is what I wrote on it. I still on. To all the women who were murdered while pregnant, to women holding little hands of children or carrying infants in their arms on their way to be gassed, to women in hiding, to the mothers who gave their children to be hidden, many never to see them again, to the righteous Gentile mothers and the nuns in convents who were hiding and protecting children in their care, to women to men as fighters in the resistance in ghettos, forests, partisan units, and to the lives of those few women who survived and bravely carried on. End of quote. My pioneering for bringing the gender aspect during the Holocaust to the internet was 21 years ago. My goal was to transfer the considerable knowledge already in print on this important aspect to the internet, to build an educational bridge between academia and the internet public at large, with university students in mind first and foremost. I do hope you will read my memoir, which is also a historical document about my peaceful community, along with close to 500,000 other Hungarian Jews, was deliberately, with extreme brutal, completely destroyed. I hope you'll reflect seriously on the weighty issues I raise. The memoir will give you more details, of course. This kind of depravity was and is possible among humans, even in cultured, educated civil societies. Genocides can happen again. Well, you're witnessing right now something terrible. The need is to fight any destructive, racist, and hateful supremacist ideology before it becomes again an unstoppable force, but without losing our own humanity. Well, some of it, as you can witness right now, Putin invading democratic Ukraine with his might is right justification. We need to guard jealously the age-tested good laws and values in our democratic way of life, where women's contributions are valued and respected and their rights are enshrined. Observing this turbulent, violent, deeply troubling world today, with anti-Semitism frighteningly rising, especially at universities, it seems our witnessing and other efforts by many fell on deaf ears. It will be up to each of us, voting adults and other activists, to effect profoundly meaningful change. I will finish my speech from a quote from a very fine public historian, Daniel Panetton, whom I greatly respect. And he said, to survive the loss of the survivors while adapting to the post-truth era and resurgent far-right political activity, Holocaust education must undergo a transition by blending the emotional and interpersonal power of survivor memory with a purposeful, civic-minded approach that grapples with the threat to democracy that fascism presents. We just might be able to keep the survivors' torch lit and the path forward illuminated. And I thank you all for listening.
Jane, your microphone's off.
Pardon me?
Okay, no, I was muted, and we want to thank you
Oh,
for
well,
sharing.
I hope that that we're going to have a good Q and answer period, because I love that period.
Well, that you have shared this with us is very good, is very strong. But my concern is that all of this is preaching to the choir. That is, there's no argument in the Jewish community that this happened. It's outreach to the non-Jewish community. And that's what I know that the Holocaust museums are trying to do. To teach tolerance, to teach that, this may have happened to one group, but the Jews have always been what we call the canary in the coal mine. The coal miners used to bring down canaries who would be killed if their toxic fumes would come out. And this is, if it's done to the Jews, people say, oh, it's the Jews. It starts with the Jews. And then it goes to other people.
I must tell you, Jane, that this is not my usual speech.
Yes.
I am much more detailed, and usually I would finish. Well, let me put it this way. I was watching what was happening today, to which way I can make it more relevant. The issues, the political and the judicial, all those issues that really started the Holocaust, that prepared the ground, the ideological ground in civic society to be helpful to carry out a genocide. After all, I talk about the fact that 12 years, the first 6 years was spent on preparing the ground, the road. And then the 6 years were actually implementing it. So it depends who I talk to, because I talk to university students at a different level than I talk to younger, I never talk to younger students than 15 years old. I can't, because of the gender issue becomes very detailed, believe you me. Invite me once and I will give you a 1.5 hour speech on many, many details of the Holocaust and experiences under those circumstances. Anyways, so I do try to make them relevant. So I have to know about current events well, all right? So what's happening? And that's what we survivors have been doing, some of them longer than 29 years, telling the children in details. Sometimes lately I felt that we actually teaching them how to murder Jews. They know now in details. That's why you see now so many, even in Hungary, that, okay, next time we don't take to a gas chamber, we're killing you right here. They now know how to kill Jews well, because we gave them all the information. So in some way it's boomeranging on us. And the question of, what's happening in schools. happening in Canada too. So the point is that I do have much more. Well, how do I explain today? I had conflicts because 20 years ago and 15 years ago still, when I went to speak to big crowds of students, and I said to myself, what am I doing here in peaceful Canada? Talking about the experience that it's so far even from their nightmares, what I'm talking about. Today, it makes more sense. But at all times, I always talked about the other genocide that came of the Holocaust. That never again, it haven't happened yet. Because there was unfortunately always another genocide. There was in Rwanda, there was Darfur, there was the Balkan Wars. Don't ask. We never lacked enough examples to show that was closer to them. And when I saw sometimes Asian students, looking bored with all this, then I went to their part of the world. What did Japan did in China and Korea and the Korean women? We have such humanity that always there was a bad example to bring up that makes it relevant to them what happened in Europe. Because let's face it, this generation and even before that, they grew up in peace, luckily. Even during the Cold War, there things happened during the Cold War, still wasn't of this magnitude. So, like the Holocaust and other genocide. So we have to make it relevant in their lives. And because it's a peaceful society, it wasn't easy. What's relevant?
Mhm.
You can't make the horrors relevant, the historical aspect and watching what's happening today. That's why I emphasize the political and judicial process, because something is happening today. I mean, in the last 10 years, especially during the Trump era, there were plenty examples to show what's happening in terms of politics. And it's difficult for young people in high school to talk about ideologies. But as this Daniel Penneton historian says, we must explain them. What's the advantage to have democracy and the democratic process? And what happens when you don't have it? Then you have a Putin now. We can point to Putin. Right. What happened in Russia during his era? Back to the autocratic dictatorships, whether it's communist or fascist. In terms of oppression, it's very similar. So you have to know your current history. You have to know historically what happened in the Holocaust, and we try to be relevant. But because the politicians, because the movers and shakers of real politics really don't care. It's self-interest in every single aspect. It is the power brokers just want power, and so are governments. So I don't know whether we can reverse what's happening today completely, but it looks like that the politics going to the right, to autocratic governments, it's growing, and democracy is weakening.
It seems to be growing, but if if good people speak out.
Yes, but you also have Steve Bannon's.
Yes.
The Steve Bannon's and those who surrounded your ex-president, they are in Europe. Steve Bannon is a fascist. It's an economic fascist, and he has been working already in Europe with all the right-wing parties. You unite the right.
And okay, the money that is behind
Of
these
course, that too.
is very if I could just switch a little bit to the past, because I see that there's a question
Yes.
that has come from somebody in the audience. Was there in Hungary?
And I ask you directly.
Oh, go ahead.
Hi.
Hi, I actually, what I'm thinking of is what was happening in Hungary when you were a child or a young person, how that can translate to today. Was the government of Hungary then, the government of Hungary now, seems like it's sympathetic to the fascism.
Yeah, go on. Yeah.
And to what extent did the public in Hungary resist that at the time?
I don't live in Hungary. I came to Canada in 1948, but I do read some of the Hungarian press and Hungarian Jewish press. And yes, Hungary was a very right-wing country, but it's an interesting thing that Horthy, who was the regent, in Hungary, held back the Nazis from Hungary till 1944. Even though he's himself an anti-Semite, it managed to hold back the Nazis coming. The Nazis occupied Hungary. The Nazis were allies. When they marched into Hungary, it wasn't to occupy Hungary. It was looking for an escape route for after the war, because this was already 1944. But while there, they encouraged the Hungarians, more than encouraged, forced the Hungarians to cause the deportation. But Horthy did hold them back till 1944. We were almost the last big Hungarian Jews were the last massive deportation, also from Greece to a point. Today, the Russians occupied Hungary, liberated. At that time, the Russians were liberators. This is how things change, And during the hot war, the Russians were not liberators. Ask people who were in Budapest and were liberated by the Russians, how they were waiting. They were the liberating forces. Now, communism as a political venue, for to rule a country, that's a whole different. Because communism says is the dictatorship of the proletariat. So right away it says we're a dictatorship. I don't know what's happening, but I know this much from the press that today's prime minister is very much a right-wing one, right of center. And the interesting story is that the main opposition in Hungary today is even a more right-wing party. More right-wing than the government party, actual fascists. They sit in the parliament democratically elected. That's how it works out, democracy. They have a certain kind of democracy that they have the elections as it should be, but anybody can run, and they have even a more right-wing party. And it is happening in Europe, I think in Poland too. The law and order parties are always indicate that, I don't know exactly in every policy how it manifests itself, but that is, I don't know what happened in France or Germany is, I don't know how it's going to go, but that is a tendency of giving up on democracy for some reason.
Was Horthy a democratically elected person?
Yeah, oh yeah. They have. This is the form. That much democracy they have. Every 4 years they have election. Yes.
Even back then in the 40s.
Oh, yes, yes. My father actually, who was an Orthodox Jew, but he wrote that there was one so-called not so what do you call it? Social democracy. That was so-called social democratic party, and usually religious people are to the right politically. Usually, for some reason, religion connected with conservatism. But yes, there was a Kulak's party. There was, of course. I don't know much about it because I was too young to understand everything. I knew more about Zionism because one of my sisters and my brothers were Shomer Hatzair Zionists, and I learned more about that in those days as a youngster. Yes, but it was a right-wing party. It's definitely. But as I said, Horthy had this special feature that he managed to hold back the Nazis till the last 2 years of the war.
Thank you.
It was interesting, so many details I don't have to talk about, but it was certain peculiarities to the Hungarian Holocaust, the Holocaust in Hungary, because they conscripted the Jewish men between 18 and 50 to the Hungarian army as slave laborers. They didn't have uniform, they had no guns, no pay, nothing. They gave them the most dangerous work in the Hungarian army, the Hungarian Jewish men. So our communities were completely deprived of all male, all adult males. At one point, two of my oldest brothers were killed in the Ukraine, in the Soviet Ukraine, because they dragged them, these slave laborers, with them, as the Hungarian army, of course, helped out the Nazi army. So they fought with the Nazis, with the Germans, and that included at that time Soviet Ukraine, that borders on Hungary at one point, and so that was a very unique aspect, that the Hungarian Jews were part of the Hungarian army as slaves. In a way, it's ironic, but in a way, they were saved from being taken to death camps. Because they were part of the Hungary. The families were taken away, like my two cousins, that's where they were, but their wives and children perished in Auschwitz-Birkenau. And the Jewish men, like my two brothers, perished in Soviet Ukraine. So it's a complicated thing. It's difficult sometimes to explain to young people, so you don't go into too many details. And so it's usually part of my regular presentation when I do it. It's the whole Holocaust is inexhaustible, in terms of stories and historical events and so many ways they knew how to torture us. It was industrial kind of mass killing. And there is no doubt in my mind that the Holocaust was a watershed in history. It reverberates even today. You see, even in this conflict, both the Ukraine and Russia refers back to the Holocaust.
Yes,
to
even
the Nazis.
with Putin says to the Russians, "Oh, our army has to go and free they're under the domination of the Nazis."
And today, Ukraine is more democratic than Russia.
Of course, but Russia is fed with propaganda. But I'm curious also about your story. You were liberated by the U.S. Army.
Yeah.
Yet you came to Canada.
Yeah.
Why did you come to Canada was it related to the number of people, or did who were admitted? The Canadians?
No, I tell you why. First of all, we didn't want to go to Palestine at the time. Okay, there at 1946, 47, there wasn't even Israel yet. But Bergen-Belsen camp, where we ended up, because my sister was there, was in the British zone. You know, after the war was ended, there was British zone, American zone, Russian zone. And Bergen-Belsen was one of the biggest displaced person camp in Germany, but this was in the British zone because that part was liberated by the British Army, Western Germany, near Hanover. And once you're in the British zone, America didn't want you. It was impossible to come to United States. We had a chance to go to Brazil. I won't go into details, that fell through. I have cousins in Brazil at the time. And so the only chance was to go somewhere connected with the British zone. And this scheme, this Taylor project, was just a very nice happening, because Canada also didn't want to let in, refugees during the Holocaust, didn't want to open up its doors till 1947 to the orphans, and then some of us came. But this was a special project by the Jewish community, the Jewish schmatte trade. You know the expression?
Correct.
Okay. and many manufacturers were Jewish at that time in the industry, and they fought with the Canadian government long enough, or tried to get us in there somehow, and that industry needed workers actually. So that's how we came, and they came and interviewed us in the labor in the Bergen-Belsen camp. We had to go through a test if we can work on a sewing machine, etc. So, and my sister was already a dressmaker, well, sort of. She passed with flying honors, flying colors. With me, they hesitated, whether they let. So I had the chutzpah, my broken Yiddish to have a conversation. I said, if you want to do to us what the Germans did to separate us, then my sister said, I'm not going. And then the three of them looked at each other, and they didn't know quite how to answer. They said, oh, okay, you go too. And this is how I ended up not knowing a thing about sewing. So it's in my memoir, my difficulties in making a living, not knowing how to sew. But we left Germany. We were somewhere where we had a chance, to build a new life, so to speak. And we did. We were young, and everybody says, that we were so resilient. This resilient being resilient, so many times people asked us. And I have only one answer, that we didn't have too many choices. Either be resilient, just decide to, or commit suicide. There was nothing else. And when you're young, you'd rather live. And you go through all the hardships, which took 5 years, really, the real hard part. And you want to live, you think you still have enough joy ahead of you that it's worth staying alive. But there were suicides, there is no doubt about that. In that, I must tell you this, since I have the time, in that displaced person camp, it was like a shtetl, 12,000 people. And most of the people were either single women who survived, and single men of the age where they already had families, in their late 20s, early 30s. And it was the amazing thing how life came, how shall I say, was created. By the time we met up with my sister, what was in existence, there was already a Yiddish theater, there was a Yiddish newspaper, there was a synagogue, there were enough rabbis to officiate at weddings. The young women, there was so much loneliness. You have no idea. I was lucky I was there with two siblings, but young women got married. Everybody wanted to belong to somebody. We're social beings, anyways, human beings. You have no idea how many marriages took place and how many children, in that order, and how many children were born. And it's like a life just, Jews just created new lives, culturally and individually, to create new families. And of course, debate about Zionism. You have, 12,000 people. There was every single shade of political party among the 12,000 people, from the extreme left, the Borokhov, to the Jabotinsky, to the right wing. Every shade was there, and debate and talking. It was nice to see that, that we were becoming human beings again, with our good points and bad points, etc. That's where we were healing. They really, as I mentioned very briefly, but the detail was particularly interesting for me. That's where I started to grow up, as a thinking individual. It so happens I was Shomer Hatzair. It's one of the left-wing of, that was most Zionist in Hungary, Shomer Hatzair, the young people. One sister and one brother were in Palestine for 5 years in the early 30s, building the Jewish homeland then. So I already was exposed to politics, and my father was Mizrahi, of course, more religious. So I was hearing always all the debate and discussion as a youngster, and something sunk in.
It's good. It's sunk in, and you are continuing to debate and continuing to speak. And
Yes.
that is wonderful.
Well, I just slowed down. I just slowed down because I am not in 100% good health, and what happening now, this war, I am so depressed. I don't see a hope that humanity ever gets together. We always megalomaniac dictator surfaces, and I am very impatient why NATO is not doing more for Zelensky. I know the explanation, but it still irks me that we're meeting, another meeting. In the meantime, people are dying, people have to leave. The war doesn't wait for all these meetings and decisions making. It's too slow.
And who are the refugees? Women and children.
And do you see? And the elderly. Oh, from one end, it's in my DNA, that, because we also went through that stage at one point. Then it became more lethal. But just seeing them leaving everything behind, I know the feeling. And you're going into the unknown. What's going to happen? Will you ever return? Or will you settle down? Families and whatnot. That's what everybody is objecting to when Zelensky mentions the Holocaust, is that don't compare, we're very jealous about this don't compare business. But he's Jewish, Ukrainian. He's facing such a hopeless situation. I don't blame him. He's trying every old way to get help. precisely because he's not getting the right help that he really needs, like, air security and whatnot. So he's mentioned the Holocaust, but so does Putin.
He just has to, Zelensky just has to be louder. He just has to be louder.
Well,
He has
but
to have, and he has to have more friends. And
well, I tell you what, to me, what is, to my way of thinking, the real danger in this situation is if Putin gets away with murder. But every damn dictator from here on, all he has to say is, I use a nuclear weapon if you interfere. At the Cuban crisis, at least both the Cubans and President Kennedy stepped back from the edge. Now, you don't know with Putin, but my gut feeling was that the NATO should have taken his off, because now it's too late. Not too late, but it's too much suffering if they do something now meaningful, or diplomatically they can do something. But I would have taken, because maybe at that point he wouldn't have, maybe now he would use, as somebody is hinting, Biden, that he might use chemical warfare. Might. Who can get into Putin's mind? But he might now, because he's not doing as well as he thought he will do.
well,
And yeah,
we simply have to hope that public opinion and Russian opinion will turn against.
oh, he's
Russia.
I just heard a very good interview by Anne, what's his name, Applebaum, who wrote a lot about a very well-known writer in Canada, who is originally from Ukraine, and wrote a number of books about Ukraine and the gulags in Russia, etc. But she just finished the book, came out, the twilight of democracy and the authoritarian, the development of authoritarian governments, that apparently he's quite favored at home, Putin, because he shut down all the media. Apparently, if you're there, the Russians today cannot listen to anything. Not only that, but if they dare to talk about it as a war, 15 years jail.
Yes.
So he is bringing in laws against even thinking of it practically as a war. So he's very oppressive. And apparently Twitter, Facebook, etc. are really shut down. So it's you see, in the Russians' mind, especially from 50 and older, fighting Nazis, it reverberates back to the Second World War, that Russia was victorious over the Nazis, along with the Allied forces, but really Russia did its very best to fight. So that is still in their mind, that the main enemy was the Nazis and we were victorious. And now that's why bringing up that they're fighting the Nazis in Ukraine, it's meaningful to them.
Until they realize that it's a lie.
Well, maybe they will later.
Thank you so much for sharing your story. And I want to repeat again that people who listen should buy Judy's book, should read it if they haven't, should contribute to her fundraiser and her website. And thank you so much. Toda Rabah.
Hey, thank you for giving me the opportunity.
Thank you so much.
Thank
And
you. And
Thank you.
hope to see you all again tomorrow, this evening, when the Jewish our book festival will continue. Thank you so
Jane.
much.
Thanks, Judy. See
thank
you later.
Thank you for
you.
coming and see you. And I see you personally soon.
See you. Bye
Yeah,
bye.
Okay.
you'll see me soon.
Thank
Bye-bye.
you, Jane.
Thank
And I hope it will be successful, and your congregation will like all
Thank
the whom you invited.
Thank you.
Thank
Okay.
you.
Thank
Bye
you so much.
bye. Bye bye.
Bye-bye.
See you. Yeah.